in lots of classrooms all around the world, there are all of these conversations happening about, well, especially around the United States, about the injustices and systemic racism and just all of these things that are going on, and the protests, and all of these courageous conversations that are going on. And if you're looking for some ways that you can have similar kinds of conversations, we've got a really good set of examples for you, and just sort of like a model that you can follow to some extent. I am super excited to get into this discussion about using HyperDocs for equity to kind of give a platform for some of those great conversations to happen. And we've got a teacher who's been doing that in her own classroom right over here. I can't wait for you to meet Nadia here in just a second, but wanted to say hello and welcome everybody. And my name's Matt Miller. I'm the author of Ditch That Textbook, along with Holly Clark from the Infused Classroom. And then these two ladies to my, see, I'm trying to get better at my pointing. These two ladies we're going to introduce in just a second. But we wanted to say hello to all of you that are joining us live. If you're willing to, we'd love for you to say what your name is, your role, and your location in the chat. So who you are, what you do, where you're from, so we can shout some of that out. And so Kelly, we're thrilled to have you as well. Could you give us just a real quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Hilton. I'm the co-author of the HyperDoc Handbook. And I also have the privilege of working with Nadia in the Pleasanton Unified School District. So we work together on a series of lesson study. And that's sort of what led to these conversations and what she's going to share with us today.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. So now the guest of honor, we're going to get to her. So Nadia, thank you again so much for joining us. We're thrilled to hear what you've been doing in your classroom and how you've been working with your students. But before that, can you just give us a quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Nadia Razi. I teach high school English, specifically African-American literature, and also AVID at Foothill High School in Pleasanton in the East San Francisco Bay Area. What do I do? I've had the pleasure of learning so much from Kelly and the other HyperDoc girls. I'm so lucky that they are in my district so that I could learn how to make a HyperDoc and also kind of pair that with what I've been doing in my classroom with anti-racist education, a focus on equity, and kind of empowering students to use their voice to make a change in the world. So,
fantastic. Very good. Well, we're thrilled to have you, like I said earlier, and wanted to see who else is in the chat, who else is joining us. So we want to say hello to Lisa from La Quinta, California. Dalton is here from North Carolina, one that we've seen several times. Here's a familiar face from, if I can get it to come up. Here's a familiar face from Twitter that I've seen. My comments aren't showing up for some reason. Ah, there it goes. Okay, there's Danessa. And then we've got Katie from, there she is right there. From, is that Cooperopolis? I'm learning more of my California places, but I've never heard of that one before.
Never heard of that.
Me either.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Very good. All right. So Deborah is here. Good to see you from Philly. We've got Robinson from Dallas, I think. There's also Larissa from San Luis Potosí from Mexico. Good to see her as well. Julieta from Texas also. We've got Lee from Palm Desert, California. Jessica's here from Northern California. Lots of California today. Arizona. Katie's here from Texas, and it goes on and on and on.
Brazil.
Evaldo from Brazil. Yeah, that's awesome. Fantastic.
Y'all are making me nervous.
Now we've just got a great crowd joining us. So, all right. So I want to sort of get out of the way here and give kind of an opportunity to see how this has all happened. So Nadia, can you just kind of walk us through the basics of I guess maybe how HyperDocs started to intersect with this kind of work that you've been doing with your students?
Sure. So I'll speak specifically about African American literature because that's what a lot of the things that we are going to be looking at are for that class. So basically, I had the opportunity to introduce this African American literature class at my school for the first time ever, and I had the opportunity to build the curriculum essentially from scratch. I had the course outline and I knew, which texts and things that I wanted to teach, but essentially I could create the curriculum and the lesson plans on my own and see, what I wanted to make of that class. And so that was right around the time that I learned about HyperDocs. I was so, like I keep saying, I'm so lucky that the HyperDoc girls are in my district, and I had the opportunity to be part of these amazing PD sessions to learn about blended learning of making, first it started out multimedia text sets and then HyperDocs. And that was just the perfect way to engage students, to bring in a lot of, what I found was that I had to bring in a lot of historical context for a lot of these texts by African American authors, because as we're kind of realizing now in our education system, there's a lot that's missing, a lot of holes in US history. And a lot of times, the first year that I was teaching African American Lit, I would ask the students, oh, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this event? Do you know about this author? All those kinds of things. And students were like, we've never heard of that. So that after the first year is really when I started realizing, okay, I'm going to have to bring in a lot of historical context. And what's a way that I can do that without, standing in front of the class and just lecturing about what the context was, to understand why what this author wrote was important. So HyperDocs were the perfect opportunity to do that. You'll see, I think that we'll walk through a couple of the HyperDocs on here today, but you'll see that there's an opportunity to just include so much information, and it's self-paced so that students can explore the information at their own rate, and they can do it with a partner and kind of explore all of these things that go into what makes a text important, other than just reading it and analyzing it and writing an essay about it. So like I kept saying, HyperDocs are the perfect way to do that, especially the setup of it. So it has there's kind of basically 3 sections. You tap into what the student already knows, then you introduce new content, and then the students are applying it in some way. So well, I think we have to look at one to be more specific, but that's basically where that kind of idea came from. And I have seen a lot of HyperDocs and not a lot, there's kind of a change now to shifting it to more anti-racist education as our kind of educational landscape is shifting. So I'm really excited to share some of the resources that I've created, and with Kelly's help.
So exciting. Yeah, and Matt, if I could just add that one of the things that led to this conversation as well is that Nadia has this HyperDoc. It's the Frederick Douglass HyperDoc that I believe we want to have her walk through. And back in October, if districts are thinking about how to have more conversations about this, I just want to share what we did in October. Our district leadership gave us the opportunity to have professional development in classrooms. So we created cohorts of teachers, and there was a cohort of 11th and 12th grade high school English teachers at all 3 of our high schools. And they were all invited to get a substitute for the day and come to the job embedded training for 3 different days. And they were consecutive days. And we invited Nadia to be our demo teacher. So on the first day, when they got out of the classroom, their professional development was to go to Nadia's African American literature class. She shared her HyperDoc that she's about to share with us. We watched her teach from this HyperDoc, and then we all sat around and debriefed the lesson and talked about the impact of the lesson. And so that was one demo. And then we had another demo on day 2, and we built in universal design for learning and other things in that training. But I think just getting out of the classroom and being able to see this work in action is really impactful. And you'll want to hear from Nadia about how she creates the community in her classroom to have these courageous conversations as well.
Excellent. All right. So can we go ahead and start looking into some of these HyperDocs? Nadia, are you good to go with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Very good.
Do you, who's gonna?
I can screen share. Do you want me to screen share one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. And can you tell us which HyperDoc we're going to be looking at?
Sure. Let me get organized here. So the first thing I want to invite people to do is to go ahead and go to the bit.ly that maybe Matt can put up. It's called Lessons by Nadia. Lessons is capitalized, and by and Nadia is capitalized. And on the second slide, you'll see her collection. And we're going to not have time to do all of those, but we can zoom in today on the Frederick Douglass HyperDoc. And that's pictured here on the left-hand side. This is the Frederick Douglass HyperDoc. Then she has, and that's the one that I was just speaking about. It also includes lessons about Juneteenth. And then this one is on homecoming, and this one is on cultural appropriation and music. But let's take a look at Frederick Douglass first so that she can talk us through this lesson. Nadia, when she designed this lesson, this was for that demo lesson that we were talking about. And so I asked her, what do you think you might be teaching that day? She had said, I think I want to teach, the speech to what to a slave is the 4th of July. And I'm not sure how I'm going to teach it quite yet. But the thing that happened with her is she just put all of this lesson together within hours after school, which is kind of amazing to me. And I think that's just what happens when you know your content and you know your students and you get excited about designing a lesson. And so if Nadia, if you could just talk us through about your thinking and how you taught this lesson a little bit, then they can see it.
Yeah, definitely. So part of what I was talking about before, kind of the 3 parts of a HyperDoc, and those are the engage, explore, and apply. So first, what we wanted to do is engage the learners and kind of like what I was saying earlier, activate any prior knowledge. And this speech that Frederick Douglass gave is about 13 years before the emancipation of slaves. And he's basically talking about, and I don't know if you've read the speech before, what to the slave is the 4th of July, and saying basically that this Independence Day that Americans are celebrating is not true independence because Black people are still enslaved. And so when we're talking about this kind of idea, there's really 2 Independence Days in the United States, or that the 4th of July isn't the real Independence Day, or Juneteenth is. And obviously, so we'll get to Juneteenth. Obviously, it's been kind of in the forefront of our news recently. But I wanted to really engage the students with this idea of the 4th of July. And I shared with Kelly last time when I was on her show with the HyperDocs, a lot of students on the first day of school, I asked them, what does it mean to be American? And several of the students talked about or shared stories about the 4th of July and how the 4th of July was so important to them, to celebrate it with their families, what it represented, the customs and the traditions that they had surrounding the 4th of July. So I wanted to take that and use that in a way to kind of lead into this idea of Frederick Douglass's what to the slave is the 4th of July. And I did that by asking them, what does independence mean to you? And so first we used this tool called an answer garden. All these students put in words or phrases that they associated with independence. And you see in the middle where it says freedom, the more times a word or a phrase is included in this answer garden, it gets bigger. So freedom is one of the biggest ideas that students are associating with Independence Day or with the idea of independence. So that is the perfect lead-in to say, okay, when we're talking about freedom, and the 4th of July we know is freedom from British rule. What we actually need to look at is the freedom of actual Americans. And at this time, there's a huge portion of Americans who are enslaved and therefore not free. So we use that kind of idea of independence, and then talked about it, kind of discussed that in class, and then went into the actual explore section of the HyperDoc, which is where I was presenting more of the information. So first we have information about who Frederick Douglass is. Like I said, unfortunately, a lot of our school systems are not doing an adequate job of introducing Black authors, Black activists, Black historical figures, all of these things. A lot of times it's Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, right? So
yeah,
I wanted to include information about Frederick Douglass, this huge, and we talked about him in my class and how he's, kind of the main guy at this time. And so I have some information about him, who he was, a biography, some famous quotes of his to kind of understand who he was before we start reading his writing. Then we moved into this idea of Juneteenth. And I put the question here, when did African Americans actually achieve independence? And I put that Americans underlined because they are American, and that's a conversation that we've obviously been having of what makes somebody American, or who's considered American. And so this is actually something I have to update because there's been so much good stuff about Juneteenth recently. So I haven't had a chance to update it yet, but I will before I teach it next year. So I did think that it was crucial to include information about Juneteenth, the day that the enslaved Americans actually heard that they were free. So Juneteenth is important not because it's the day that actually, they were freed, but the Emancipation Proclamation was signed 2 years prior. And these enslaved people in Texas had no idea that they were free. So Juneteenth marks the day that they were told, and that they actually realized that they were supposed to be free this whole time. So it's kind of, it's really surprising for the students to hear about. They had no idea it existed. Most people didn't. A lot of people don't learn about this in school. So it was important to kind of introduce it because when you think about it, it's kind of a radical idea. Like, this is not your real Independence Day. This is a real Independence Day, and you've never heard of it before. So the way that I introduced that is a video from Blackish, which is a source I use a lot in my class. So the little cartoon video right there, yeah, that's an excerpt from an episode of Blackish where they write a little song in the style of Schoolhouse Rock that tells you what Juneteenth is. And Blackish is created for the wider, it's on ABC, right? So white people and all a mixed audience is watching it. So it's kind of a really accessible way to understand what Juneteenth is. I wanted to also include, so this modern controversy, that's somewhere that I can include a lot of the information about Juneteenth that we've been experiencing the last couple weeks. The one that I did include in here was from the last 4th of July. Colin Kaepernick quoted a passage from What to the Slave is the 4th of July on the 4th of July and tweeted it. And we see that clearly there was some disagreement about what the speech meant. And I wanted to introduce that to the students so that you can kind of see both sides and decide for yourself. So that they can kind of, and we'll get into how they decided, what is the main idea of the speech, and I'll show you how we did that in a little while. Okay. I wanted to include some recitations. So we have some amazing voices here that share part of What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and some of the most iconic voices. And the reason behind this was because speeches were meant to be heard. So I didn't want to just give it to them and say, read this and, take notes or annotate it. So what I wanted to include was an opportunity to actually listen to what it sounded like. And then actually when we read the speech in class, I read the whole thing out loud to them as they listened. So that was something that I think was really important here, that they could see some of the famous recitations. And then what I also did was connect it to a letter by James Baldwin. I don't know if you have read A Letter to My Nephew by James Baldwin, which kind of embodies some of the similar sentiments as this speech. So James Baldwin, at the end of his letter, says that that the United States is celebrating independence 100 years too early. So really kind of drawing the idea that unless Black Americans are free, we're not all free, right? So that was kind of the explore piece. Lots of information there for the students to explore. I put this little stop sign here so they stop, because we were kind of discussing, we were doing, I won't go into too much detail, but they were basically charting their thinking on Post-its that they were sticking up on the whiteboard and discussing it, and we were grouping them to see, okay, what is it that you think is surprising? What connections have you made to other stuff that we've learned in class? What questions do you have? All those kinds of things.
Can I
Yes.
ask you a quick question? I don't know if it's a question, more of like an observation, as my mind's kind of being blown with this. And Kelly, thank you for scrolling back up. That's what I was going to ask you to do. I just keep thinking about, like, you know, the collection of resources that you have here is so, you have like so many different ways of looking at the same issue, which I thought was huge. But I think the thing that I really love about it is that you have a variety of really good prompts. You had that very first question that just asked, what does it mean to you to be an American? And it wasn't like, you know, you weren't playing a gotcha game there, but it was an accessible question that students could really give you a response to.
Right.
And the fact that you pulled in that prompt, I'm kind of geeking out about this, that you pulled in that prompt and you use this answer garden to figure out what the big words were in it that they used the most. And then you took that student data to guide the discussion even further. Like, I'm looking at it, you know, obviously from a content standpoint, it's super important and it's something that's missing in curriculum. But from a pedagogical standpoint, I'm just like completely nerding out about this because it's put together so nicely. And then the ability for students to be able to explore, but also in different ways, because you've got the written word, but you've also got the spoken word, and hearing the emotion in it from the speeches and everything. I just wanted to stop and appreciate all of that, because I think this is done really, really well.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Kelly?
Nope, I wasn't.
I wanted to add, Matt, I felt the same way, and this is what Nadia demoed in the classroom. So when the teachers came in, they saw her kind of teach from the answer garden, which had already been collected on another day, and connect to that conversation they've already had. And then a general class period is, I think, 54 minutes or something like that. And so they had the HyperDoc and they were exploring. And then I'm going to pull up some pictures to share with you really quickly, where you can see what she did in her lesson. They stopped here, and then she taught from there what their thinking was. So she asked them 3 questions at that time. What is some new information that you've learned? What has surprised you? And what questions do you have? And what she did is take her whiteboard in the classroom. This is where it's a beautiful blended lesson, and section it off and pass out different colored Post-it notes for the students to now just jot down and get up and move around the room and start putting their thinking up. So I'm going to pull up those photos so you can see the kids doing that a little bit as well. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Nadia, or how that all came together.
Sure. One thing that, so basically I just let them stick their Post-its on those 3 sections. So new and surprising information, connections to what we've done in class already, and I wonder. And at the end of the day, after all the students, I had 4 classes of African American Lit this past year. So after the whole day was over, I have hundreds of Post-its on the board. I took them all down and categorized them to see what was it that the students were gravitating to. Like, what was it out of all of this information that the students really thought was surprising or that really resonated with them the most. And there were a couple things. One of which was, why have we never heard of Juneteenth? And things along that same kind of idea, like, wow, so, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't actually do anything. Why did we learn about it, but not, everything that kind of came after? That was basically the main, I won't go into some of the other stuff, but that was basically the main takeaway. And so a lot of times Kelly refers to this as my Juneteenth lesson, when really I was like, oh, this is What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. But Juneteenth really stood out as one of the things that the students were focused on, because we just really were like, we've never heard of this, and it's so important. So that was something that really, that was kind of our biggest chunk of the Post-its. Oh yeah, there are some Post-its. I don't know if you could read them. It's kind of, I can't read it from here.
But this is on tech, off tech. And this is what a HyperDoc is. This is what blended learning is. This can happen in remote learning where they put something on a Padlet. Like, the beauty of this and the idea that the kids are recognizing that we're not learning this in school. And something, and I don't want to go off on this, but something I know your kids are doing in your school district is they've come to the school board and they said, hey, I graduated in 2020 and I didn't learn any of this. This is a problem, and we want to require your Pleasanton School District, Unified School District, to start teaching this. And this is happening in Mercer Island. This is happening in New Jersey. This is happening in Texas. Kids everywhere are going to school boards saying, enough already. How do I not know about Juneteenth?
And I'm really proud of the students in our district who are joining this effort. And because as soon as I heard about that, I had several students in my mind, because we talk about it all the time. Anytime I say, do you guys learn about this in class? They're like, no, we didn't. That we didn't learn this in history. Sometimes what I will say is that the students who take AP US history do have more exposure to some of these events and people in African American history more than the students who don't take AP, which I think is actually, there's a lot there, but
yeah, there's a lot there.
So that's something that I would hear a lot from the students. And I've been in contact with the AP US history teacher, who's done a really, really good job of of trying to bring in all these other voices. And she's currently bringing in Native American voices and things like that too. So I'm really proud of the efforts that some of the teachers are making to make the curriculum more inclusive.
Nadia, can I just add, because we might have people here who want to do this and don't know where to begin. And I just want to lead people to a book called A People's History of the United States. And it's by Howard Zinn. And Howard Zinn has a foundation. And he really looks at the other stories that we don't hear in regular history class. And it's what I use to teach history to 8th graders even. So it can be used at any level. But that's where you go look for some of this. And there are other books as well, but it's a really great start.
Sorry, I was looking for it. I think it's right over here on my bookshelf. I can't find it.
I can't really start this process without Howard Zinn, to be honest with you.
Well, it's just a process of realizing that everything that we've learned in history is told through a singular lens, and there's so much more to history than what we've been taught. And all of this is stuff that I have learned on my own, not even in college. As a teacher, that I've been seeking out this information because I want to, present the complete picture to my students. So yeah, it's been a really long road of realization for me that I didn't hardly learn anything in my high school history classes. So, and that's not to say anything about the schools I went to, but maybe it was about my level of engagement. I don't know. So there's a lot of factors that go into what is being taught, what students respond to, what they're doing with their education, all of those things. Go ahead.
I was going to mention that we had a comment come in from yet another co-author of the HyperDocs handbook from Lisa Highfill. Yep. Yeah, we're all like blowing kisses to Lisa. She says brief and debriefing these kinds of lessons to ensure that the lesson includes anti-racist content, then time to collaborate and create with colleagues. This is PD that works. I just wanted to call that out because I thought that was so good.
This is one of the most valuable PDs that I've been a part of. I got to go watch I wasn't the only demo teacher. I got to go and be a student in one of my colleagues' classes. And you learn so much from doing that. But yeah, we did have a rigorous pre-brief and debrief process that, these HyperDoc ladies really challenged me to think about what was in my lesson. And they do a really good job because I think that the way that I do it, I'm doing things without realizing I'm doing them. So Kelly, thank you so much. She's always done such an amazing job of saying, look what you're doing here. And then I say, oh, I guess I am doing that. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So to this point, we've talked about kind of the 3 focus points that you use to create this HyperDoc. We started with the engage part where you asked that great question, what does it mean to you to be an American? And then we went in to explore and saw the recitations of the speech and some history and, a wide variety of different texts. And then there was the big stop sign. And so after that, I assume that probably was the end of the explore, and now we're getting on to the apply part, right?
Yes. So for the apply for this one, I really wanted to make sure that we were doing something more than just, scanning and finding important quotes or writing about it. So what we did, like I said, I read the speech out loud. They're listening to it. I told them that they could have the text in front of them, but I really did want them to focus on listening to it and seeing what stands out as you listen. What is some of the imagery that you hear? What are some strong words? What kind of, diction and syntax and imagery and all of those kinds of things is Frederick Douglass using in order to make this point? That is something that by this point we're all like, yeah, okay, we agree with him. He's making a good point that this 4th of July is for white people, not for everyone else. So we used this idea of sketchnoting. So I included a video that shows students basically a how-to of sketchnoting or visual note-taking. There's a couple of different words for it, so they could watch that. I put this link to the epic rap battles of history between Frederick Douglass and Thomas Jefferson as an optional practice. That I said, if you want to watch this short video, it's just a couple minutes long, and listen to it and practice sketchnoting before we get into actually doing it for the Frederick Douglass speech. And that was just kind of a way to say, hey, watch this funny epic rap battles of history because it's hilarious. And we have kind of this inside joke about how racist Thomas Jefferson is. So that's always fun to bring in whenever I can. And if you look at this beautiful piece of art that a student created, and you click on there, that'll take you to actually the instructions of what they're being asked to do, which is to create a visual representation of this speech. So not only are they drawing, pulling out these important words and phrases, passages, they can also draw. They can basically represent the content of the speech in any way that they can, as long as it's a visual. And then at the end, I ask them to write down the main idea. So you'll see some of these. These are from this past year's students. So some of the main ideas in the middle, you'll see a lot of them write the word hypocrisy. You'll see the word lies or sham or things like that. And you see a lot of really beautiful imagery of what it means to be American, of being left out of that American experience of freedom, which is sometimes synonymous with being American, right? And to see that there's this huge population of people who never were able to experience that. So there's a lot of examples there. If you go down to the very bottom, I included some more examples just because I think that the art that these students are creating is so beautiful and something more than I could even imagine They always, anytime we do something creative, they always exceed my expectations. So I wanted to showcase the students' art as much as I could.
Oh, I want you to press record on that. Like, I have this thing, Nadia, where like when a kid creates art, I want them, and maybe you've done this, like just explain what you were thinking when you created this. And I would probably die to hear those explanations.
Yeah, we do. We share it out. And we do, just because we don't have time, our class sizes are so big, but in your table groups, pick one. And as a group, you're kind of just explaining why you chose this one, what some of the choices were that went into the artwork, why you chose the word in the middle, what are some key phrases. So we're doing some really quick share outs. Not as much as I could listen to the choices that they were making for days.
Right. And other educators could hear. So it'd be one of your maybe things.
Maybe next year. Kelly, you have to come into my class next year and record.
So I have been recording her on another lesson, actually, that she's that's on her collection. It's this lesson right here. It's called Vernacular in the Modern Era and Contemporary Periods Music. And so she does this whole music lesson. And I went into her classroom and recorded like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to see the delivery of the lesson. And to capture the conversations. But that's a whole another webinar. But it's this art of delivering from these, where this one HyperDoc right here that's on her collection is a week of lesson plans that led to some other teaching and learning that happened. And it's because you're setting up, you're doing that pre-planning before, you're doing the thinking before what kind of experience you're going to guide students through. And then it's all ready to go for you. And then you have to, and then when you need to change it up too. As you've heard Nadia mention, she wants to update the Frederick Douglass HyperDoc because of the new information that we have. You can keep it relevant. This homecoming HyperDoc, she's done the same. She's had a couple of years, and the last couple of years, there's a 2019 version and a 2020 version. We have the most current one there because she'll just go back and update with the most current sources. Same with this one too, her Black Lives Matter multimedia tech set. So incredible. And
I was going to ask you if we have time, if you could open that one.
Yes. While she opens it, I want to say, Nadia, I know you have this amazing, I don't know if it was a tech set or a HyperDoc around white fragility. And since we're kind of running out of time, would you be willing to come back like on Thursday or a time that Matt and I can find to have you come back and walk us through that? Because that's a great learning material for teachers who are also reading that, along with things like anti-racist, how to be an anti-racist. And so I would love if you would come back on.
Sure, definitely.
Great.
And so
were you going to
interrupt?
You were going to pull up I just wanted to talk quickly about the Black Lives Matter.
I think we've got time to wrap up with that. I think that'll be a good place to stop. That'll be great.
And Matt, someone asked where these are
located. Start, not stop. Kelly, are you going to pull it up?
Yeah, it's just not loading for me for some reason. One second.
So basically what I'll say about that tech set is that it's gone through several iterations. And so first it started out around the time of the protests in Ferguson years ago. That's when I really, started using tech sets and HyperDocs to bring into the class so that we could kind of explore this idea around the idea of justice. And that's when I was teaching sophomore English. So it's not, it was a little, not harder, but you did have to kind of work a little harder to make those connections. So what I did for sophomore English and one of our core texts is To Kill a Mockingbird. So what I wanted to do was bring in a lot of actual Black voices, since that book is written by a white woman. So first it started out with this idea of justice and what does justice mean, and bringing in, there was just a small portion at the bottom that was this Black Lives Matter section. And then as the years went on, I have changed it several times. And this is the newest iteration. Unfortunately, I have to continue adding names and faces and stories of Black people who are being killed. So here, this is the most recent iteration as of this weekend, and I really wanted the focus to be on the people and that who column there. So those are the only images that are included in this text set. Is all of their faces. You click on those to read their stories. And then it also, along the other side, has all of these resources of what Black Lives Matter is, why they're doing this work, what some of the controversy is. So I address kind of some of those counter movements and things like that. There's a piece in here that, because this is just a multimedia text set, it's not a full HyperDoc. So this is kind of a starting place for the lesson that I'm, framing in the classroom and in the form of a class discussion. So there is just a graphic organizer in there to kind of chart their thinking and then bring those ideas to the class discussion and go from there.
It's amazing. This is just the power of multimedia text sets right here. Your design has the images and the current relevant information, but even the second column of like the who, what, why, what, and how, and now what. That's so powerful. Although it's just the text set, you're still guiding them, this text set is guiding them to get ready to do some things with their thinking. And when we spoke, Nadia, and the protests started happening, you could maybe speak to that. This is why your students were ready to have these conversations and ready to go be activists themselves when everything happened a couple of weeks ago. And even before then, I know that you've been doing this work all year with them, but this is the kind of conversations that they're having all year long that got them ready to really be activists this past June as well.
Yeah. Just like Kelly said, they were ready. They were waiting. It's hard to say that this is let me think of how to phrase this. What's happening in our country right now is tragic and awful and horrific to watch. But the students were like, is it bad that I'm happy this is happening because this is our opportunity to make change? And they're going to protests and they're doing they're sharing all of these resources and just really using their education in a way that I never thought that I would see. And it's so inspiring. But I mean, this generation, you cannot underestimate Generation Z.
Oh boy, did we learn that?
They are awesome. Yeah. And they're so smart and they're ready. And so it's really a privilege to be able to talk through these things with them and hear from them. And like you said, Matt, all of what I'm doing in my classroom is coming from them and what they're interested in. I say, okay, cool, let's run with that. Or let's learn more about that idea that you had a question about. So yeah, they're the best. Wow. Hey students, love you so much.
Also, I want to say for people who are interested in what you're doing too, there's another book called Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. And I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but also a good start. Sadly, these are both white authors, and I'd like to see something else, but they do really switch the lens on history a bit. So
and the author of White Fragility is also white. So, and that was something new for me, making a HyperDoc based on a text written by a white author, which is not something I do a lot. But so we'll talk more about that next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Before you get to see Nadia again, I just encourage you to go to the bit.ly that Matt just shared, because I learn from her HyperDocs so much. Like when I dive in, I'm a student. When I did the music one, I actually did the lesson with her, and you'll learn so much because of the way it's all put together. She also has not only HyperDocs for students on that collection, but 2 HyperDocs for educators for professional development, for book clubs. So that's what we'll come back and talk about another time. But if you're reading Biased or White Fragility, she has already curated a study guide essentially through this incredible HyperDoc for those 2 books. And she's led some of those conversations in our school district with book clubs as well. So we're just very lucky to have her knowledge and skills, and appreciate her sharing all this work with everyone today.
Absolutely. And it's all out there for free, right down there at that link. If you haven't gone and grabbed that link, grab that link. So yeah, this has been fantastic. Nadia, thank you so much for sharing so freely through your HyperDocs, and for coming on here and just being willing to give us ideas so that we can learn and we can help our students grow.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And thanks again so much for all of you that have watched. If you've been watching live, we've had a great time interacting with you in the comments and doing this. If you're finding this on a replay, we thank you so much for it. If you want to see more live videos like this, definitely check out the Ditch That Textbook YouTube channel and hit subscribe. Holly's Infused Classroom Facebook is on, gosh, I'm losing my words.
So want me to say it? So just join us in the Facebook group Infused Classroom, where we do a lot of this as well. So what a great day, and thank you, Nadia and Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.